animosity on that side to UN, I can understand why psychologically that would have happened. I yield again to the gentlewoman.
Then in preparing the correction for that, inadvertently, two numbers were reversed in the number for the resolution. So I don't have a quote from Murphy's Law, a Latin quote from Murphy's Law, but I will say that it appears as though in the attempt to make one correction, unfortunately, another mistake was made. It is pure, they were both purely clerical errors, no nefarious intent made, and we would like to move on in as expeditious a fashion as we possibly can, because we know our colleagues and we are looking forward to a weekend of work at home, and we'd like to move along and get this accomplished so we can get to the important work, the underlying bill.
Mr. Speaker, proceeding on my reservation, I appreciate the gentlewoman's mea culpa. She wasn't here at the time. I would note that it is my predecessor, the late Reverend Robert Drinan, S.J., who was better than I at responding to mea culpas, so I won't be able wholly to deal with that. But I do think this is more than simply a double error. It's a matter of haste, and it is relevant because, and I would just take exception to the gentleman saying, well, it's important that we get this done right away. I think, frankly, the problem has been that in these past couple of years, and to some extent before, we haven't met frequently enough. I understand people would like to get back to the districts they represent, but I think that this is emblematic of our not having enough time to deal with things. Look, we are going to be voting, I think, on 20-something amendments today. Important amendments, an important bill that were debated for 10 minutes each, late into yesterday evening. No proper airing of very controversial subjects. And indeed, I think this is what happens when you try to do too much too soon. People on the other side were critical of some of the legislation we passed. Financial reform bill, they said it was too encompassing. But it went through a much more thorough process than this very controversial, even more comprehensive bill we're dealing with today. This is a bill that we're dealing with today that deals with every single subject that comes before this Congress, because it would put severe restrictions on the adoption of regulations about financial reform, about health, about the environment, about occupational safety, about transportation safety. And yeah, it is a problem when you try to do too much too soon. So I understand that I do not impute any nefarious intent. Let me say, under the House rules, you can't impute nefarious intent even if you think there is some, and I don't think there is any. So for two reasons, I don't impute that. But it does seem to me this is an example and a chance for us, frankly, to talk about a flawed legislative process. We're doing this bill, which is kind of a big message bill, and I know there's a lot of criticism on the other side of the United States Senate, but the Senate passed an agricultural bill. This House isn't even going to take one up, a very important agricultural bill. The Senate passed a transportation bill. This House had to go along with a conference without any chance to deliberate on it. The Senate passed a postal reform bill to keep the Postal Service going, and this House can't take it up. So when we can't do the basic legislation that we should do, and we do one of these broad message bills that's overly comprehensive, and then we make mistakes, I think it's worth some notice. And I will now yield to my colleague from New Jersey.
If I could speak on the gentleman's reservation, I thank the gentleman, thank the gentlelady. Obviously, there's no nefarious intent. There's no question about that. I would like the House to understand where we are procedurally. It's my understanding that the House yesterday spent the better part of the day debating a bill which said that regulation should not take effect until unemployment hits 94%. Is that the gentleman's understanding?
Apparently that was what was in the bill because, and they said it was a typo, that the words, the letters U and N were left out. I will say there's certain equality here. The day before yesterday the mistake was letters, today it's numbers. I suppose tomorrow it'll be astrological signs.
And reclaiming, I would assume that flows from the fact that people didn't read the bill, because we debated yesterday the most part of the day on a bill that erroneously said regulations can't take effect until unemployment hits 94%. The intention evidently was until employment hits 94%. Then it's my understanding we find ourselves at the present moment in a situation where the correcting rule that would have fixed the word unemployment to be employment itself has an error in it, that it refers to another bill by reference. I would yield to the gentlelady. Is that correct?
No, it's my time. If the gentleman wants me to yield, I will yield. But first I would note that the error was in the first substantive page. This was not buried somewhere deeply. So just to reinforce the point that a lot of people didn't read the bill, that error was very much in the
gentleman
early part.
would yield that my understanding was in the fourth paragraph of the bill.
First substantive one. And if the gentleman wants me to, I would yield to the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, we are all human beings. How ironic it is that our colleagues were here just a few minutes ago on the floor discussing the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado. And that was as great an example of what great human beings and how bipartisan we can be in this chamber. It's as great a bipartisan effort as I've seen in a long time. We know what to do as caring human beings, what to say in such situations. And it's such a great example of how this body can operate. That group was given 40 minutes to talk about a great tragedy. Now we're engaging in a gotcha situation over an insignificant issue for which we take the responsibility. And I'm frankly embarrassed that the tenor of the conversation is going in this direction after the wonderful bipartisan effort we just saw on this floor. A mistake was made, and then in attempting to correct the mistake, an extraordinarily minor other mistake was made. I would appeal to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to say, we are human beings. We know how to forgive mistakes. Neither of these mistakes was made by a member. We're quite willing to overlook mistakes like this in the past. And I think in the spirit of comedy, in the spirit that was established on this floor this morning, we should move on, get to the work that the American people sent us here for, and understand, as was quoted this morning by one of our colleagues, our time is very precious. Don't waste it by playing gotcha games.
Well, I will take that.
Think about what we discussed earlier. Mr. Polis and I will debate this rule, and we'll do it in a spirit of comedy, and that's the way I think we should be operating. Yes, we made a mistake. Yes, a second mistake was made. We acknowledge that. We accept it. Now we'd like to get on to the people's business.
First, as regards the tragedy, of course we all come together. But the fact that we can celebrate tragedy does not mean that we put aside in a democratic body our legitimate differences. And this is not simply a small mistake, but it is a small mistake in a bill that is about as partisan it gets. To make a plea for bipartisanship with this excessively partisan bill that is being put through in such a procedurally inappropriate fashion, with major concerns about every aspect of the federal government given 10 minutes of debate at 9 and 10 o'clock at night to be voted on 20 at once. No, that's a mistake. Secondly, as the gentleman from New Jersey and I pointed out, and it is not simply that a mistake was made, but it's a mistake that would easily have been caught early if people had read the bill. And I stress this because when we did some of the other legislation, financial reform, health care, there was constant repetition of the argument on the Republican side. You haven't read the bill, nobody's read the bill. Well, you haven't read this bill, apparently, Mr. Speaker, at least not very many people. And blaming the staff, I never like to do that, because the staff prepares things, but the members sign off on it. So, yeah, we're going to proceed to this debate, but we are talking here about an indication that an overly broad bill, given too little time for consideration, people on the other side, members, apparently didn't read it. And that is not a small point. It is symptomatic of where we are. And I would yield briefly to my friend.
I would thank my friend for yielding. I agree completely with the gentlelady that human mistakes are made, and that's not what this is about. And certainly the House should the House should review this.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw my unanimous consent request.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 30 minutes. An hour.
For the purpose of debate only, Mr. Speaker, I yield the customary 30 minutes. And
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 hour.
for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
To quote Rules Committee Chairman Dreyer, we are here playing out the 21st century version of the great Shakespearean play, Much Ado About Nothing. House Resolution 741 provides for the adoption of the amendment referred to in the resolution, which would correct the technical error in H.R. 4078, the Red Tape Reduction and Small Business Job Creation Act. It's very unfortunate that I must present this rule to the House today. The reason we are here is due to a typographical error. This innocent mistake could have been quickly and easily corrected through a unanimous consent agreement, but tragically, the Democrat minority could not resist this opportunity to attempt to score political points. Not a day goes by that I don't hear from constituents disheartened by the rigid partisanship emanating from Washington, D.C. This week we had an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of cooperation the American people are craving without in any way compromising our principles. It's a shame that the Democrats missed this opportunity, choosing instead to force this exercise in futility, tying up this House unnecessarily. There's not much more that needs to be said on this issue at this point, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves her time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady for the time. The bill before us here, referencing H.R. 783, is the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act of 2011. It is a bipartisan bill sponsored by Mr. Moran of Virginia, along with Rob Whitman, along with Bobby Scott and Jerry Connolly. Now, my party did intend to withdraw the objection and allow the change to proceed. Unfortunately, absent any change, we are still talking about a change to the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act of 2011. Now, this act extends federal recognition to several tribes in Virginia and establishes their relationship with the federal government. The tribes that it establishes are the Chickahominy Tribe, the Chickahominy Indian Tribe Eastern Division, the Upper Mattapony Tribe, the Rappahannock Tribe, the Monacan Indian Nation, and the Nansemond Indian Tribe. Now, this makes members of those tribes who apply and enroll eligible for services and benefits provided by the federal government to federally recognized Indian tribes. It also requires that the Secretary of the Interior take the specified lands into trust for the benefit of those tribes. Now, this bill does have bipartisan support, and I think it's a good thing that we're taking up a bipartisan bill. We were willing to, again, withdraw our objection and allow a change to be made. The only problem now with the discussion of this bill is that the corresponding change indicated in the resolution doesn't really make sense as applied to this bill. Again, this is a bill that establishes several tribes, and yet a corresponding change is being made to the definition of the unemployment rate, which I can't find in the bill. So I'd like to ask my colleague, Ms. Fox, where in the bill is the reference to the unemployment rate that is being changed in this resolution?
I believe that the Murphy's Law that was operating on our side of the aisle has skipped over, and the gentleman is referencing the wrong bill. So
Well, I
it
believe,
is not.
reclaiming my time. I mean, this is the bill that is referenced in the resolution that the clerk read. I heard that, and I'm here ready to discuss the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal Recognition Act of 2011, but I can't find the corresponding change that this resolution makes. And I just would like to ask the gentlelady to direct where in the bill is the unemployment reference in this Thomasina Indian Tribe Recognition Bill.
I believe again that the gentleman is referencing the wrong bill. We are dealing with House Resolution 741 at this point, and I believe the gentleman is on the wrong bill.
Reclaiming my time, I guess I'll make a point of well, not a point of parliamentary inquiry. I'll actually will make a point of parliamentary inquiry. If I could ask the clerk to read the current resolution before us.
Is there objection to the unanimous request to have the clerk read the title of the resolution? Being none, the clerk will read.
House Calendar Number 152, House Resolution 741, resolved that during further consideration of the bill H.R. 4078, to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0% as amended, pursuant to House Resolution 783, the further amendment printed in Section 2 of this resolution shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. Section 2. The amendment referred to in the first section of this resolution is as follows. In Section 102B, strike employment and insert unemployment.
Mr. Speaker, I think by having the reading clerk read this, we can see, as I said before, that unfortunately it appears that the mistakes have gone over to the other side of the aisle. As the gentleman would see, we are dealing with, he was quoting the wrong resolution. We're dealing with changes to House Resolution 783.
Reclaiming my time, again, looking at the Thomas Registry, H.R. 783 is called the Thomasina E. Jordan Indian Tribes of Virginia Federal
Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Colorado controls the time.
The House is not in order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But let us get on to it. Again, the corresponding change does not exist. In the spirit of bipartisanship, I was informed that my party was willing to withdraw their objection to a change that would have made a proper reference in this resolution to a corresponding bill that made sense. Absent that, the change does not make sense. I think it speaks to the again, the broader issue of why the great rush on a bill that is not an emergency bill by any sense of the word. There are critical bills we face we need to move quickly on. My goodness, the Senate just passed the middle-class tax cut. If the House doesn't pass a corresponding middle-class tax cut, taxes will increase for tens of millions of American families January 1st. There should be likewise some urgency around reining in our budget deficit and balancing the budget. Likewise, there should be some degree of urgency about creating jobs, ending the recession, putting people back to work. Here we have a bill, H.R. 4078, which of course is referenced under either version, the corrected or non-corrected version of this particular resolution that is not a bipartisan bill. It's a bill that in Judiciary Committee did not have any Democratic support. It's a bill the President has indicated he does not support. It's a bill that we have no indication from the Senate that they would proceed with or pass this bill. And I fail to understand the urgency of moving forward so fast that we don't only make, that there's not only a mistake that was made in the original bill, but there's also a mistake apparently that was made in the correcting resolution. And there seems to be some uncertainty about whether we're even talking about a change to this bill or a Virginia tribe bill or an unemployment definition. And again, I would fully understand that if this was an emergency situation that required this body to move forward on behalf of our nation. If this was a last-minute deal and something was expiring at midnight, we would need to immediately correct that and move forward, and I don't think there would be any games from either side, because that was for the importance of the country. But that's not the situation that we're facing here today. Now, the American people, unfortunately, have grown to expect inefficiency and ineffectiveness from the House of Representatives. But this set of errors, this comedy of errors here today, is really just icing on the cake. The Republicans have put together a partisan omnibus bill that they later find out had a typo. Then there was an effort to correct the typo, an effort that our side was willing to allow to move forward after briefly discussing. And then inexplicably, the Republicans decided not to correct the mistake, and now it's unclear whether we're talking about a tribal recognition bill or a non-existent bill, a bill that has not been introduced. If there is no HRES 783, we are referencing a non-existent bill, unless it references H.R. 783 from a previous session. But in any event, these matters need to be corrected before we can proceed in any manner. This is an example of how the House of Representatives has run of late. There are many bipartisan, job-creating ideas that we can take up, and we should take up on behalf of the country. Instead, we have a partisan approach that lacks bipartisan support, an innocent error made in the bill, another innocent error made in correcting the error to the bill, and that leaves us in a quandary, frankly, because we're discussing a fix to a non-existent bill that it's hard to debate or talk about, because how can one be for or against a change to a non-existent bill? And that puts all of us in a very difficult situation, and I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the American public even more so, the dismay that they show at this Congress is only doubled and tripled, just throwing up their arms and saying, how are you even talking about a bill that makes reference to and changes a non-existent bill, which may or may not be a Virginia tribal bill, an underlying bill that's a partisan bill that confuses employment with unemployment. So that's where we are, Mr. Speaker. We'll get through this together. We'll move forward as a country, but we can do better. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I just have to point out to my colleague across the aisle that he has added a whole act to this comedy of errors, a whole act. I know that my colleague, in his orientation, must have learned the difference between bills and resolutions. And even though our staff attempted to help him and his staff understand this and save an embarrassment, we are not dealing with a House bill, we're dealing with House Resolution 783, which, and my colleague is going to the, said does not exist. It is a resolution, House resolution. That is different, Mr. Speaker, from a House bill, which is an HR, has an HR number. So, unfortunately, again, my colleague has compounded the situation.
Will the
as
gentlelady
he
yield?
said. Well,
Just for a
not
brief
just
question.
this moment.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take my colleague's offer to not. Okay, I hope he will fulfill his comment that they won't object to our getting this matter straight and moving on this morning so that we can get to the other business of the House. And with that, I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Colorado.
But prior to yielding to the gentlelady from Connecticut, I just want to ask the gentlelady from North Carolina, what is House Resolution 783? We're having trouble locating it.
That does not exist, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, reclaiming my time, again, in the absence of an actual House Resolution 783, I thought perhaps it was an erroneous reference to H.R. 783. Again, it's unclear what we are debating. With that, I know we have somebody here who wants to debate an important topic that's critical to the country, and I'd be happy to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro.
Gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 3 minutes.
Instead of debating whether we're going to have a resolution to fix a resolution or a resolution to fix a bill, what I want to urge is that what we do, that this House take up the middle-class tax relief package that the Senate passed yesterday. So I rise to urge the House majority to bring to the floor the middle-class tax cut that was passed in the Senate yesterday. Let me just make a quote from the Washington Post yesterday, the headline: Republicans want to raise taxes on the poor. Why? The tax cut plan passed yesterday by the Democrats in the Senate and supported by the President would provide tax cuts to 98% of Americans, 97% of small businesses in this country. Failure to pass this bill would mean 114 million middle-class families would see their taxes increase, including 1.4 million in my state of Connecticut. Yet, the House majority appears intent on holding these middle-class tax cuts hostage to further tax cuts for the wealthiest people in this nation. In fact, the House majority's reverse Robin Hood tax plan, which failed in the Senate yesterday, would raise taxes on middle-class and working families in order to pay for even more breaks for the wealthiest Americans. The majority's plan is unconscionable. In order to pay for an over $160,000 tax break for millionaires, it would allow tax cuts to expire for 13 million working families and raise taxes on the most vulnerable households in America. The Republican proposal would significantly weaken the child tax credit, leaving nearly 9 million families to lose an average of $854, with a family with a one full-time minimum wage earner and 2 children seeing their credit drop far more drastically from $1,812 to $267. And as a result, the families of 2 million children would be pushed back into poverty. In addition, the Republican proposal would weaken the Earned Income Tax Credit, which supports low-income working families. This credit kept 8.3 million people out of poverty last year. The proposal will also prevent millions of families from getting help to pay for college through the American Opportunity Tax Credit, and all to pay for more tax breaks for the wealthiest families in this country. country. This tax plan reveals the true colors of this House majority. They say they do not want to raise taxes on Americans in this economy, but their actions here speak louder than their rhetoric. And again, a quote from an article yesterday in the New York Times. Senate Republicans will press this week to extend tax cuts for affluent families scheduled to expire January 1st, but the same Republican tax plan would allow a series of tax cuts for the working poor and the middle class to end next year.
Time of the gentlelady from Connecticut
30.
has expired.
Yield an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
There's a better way forward. Let's take up the bill that was passed by the Senate, a bill that provides continued tax relief for the vast majority of American families. Let's not have working class families with children who are struggling to get by in order to support tax breaks for the wealthiest few. Let's have this House majority bring up the Senate passed middle-class tax plan, support tax relief for middle-class and working families, and I yield back, and I thank the
Time of
gentleman.
the gentlelady's expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inquire of my colleague if he believes that his side, in keeping with the theme of Shakespeare, has extracted their pound of flesh this morning, and if so, we are ready to close.
We have one remaining speaker.
I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection, so
Mr.
ordered.
Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to make an amendment which proposes that Congress will not adjourn until the President signs middle-class tax cuts into law. And with that, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding time. I would hope that the order of business on this floor is guided by priorities, the most essential priorities that are calling for this body to respond to the people of this great nation, and in these difficult economic times to do it with a degree of urgency. But what is our order of business here today on the floor? Fixing a typo. That's what we're doing here this morning. We're fixing a typo on an election year-driven, politically motivated bill. But we are really wasting time and playing games. You see, our families and businesses are calling out for compromise, for confidence, and for certainty. And this body has utterly failed to answer that call. Just yesterday, the other chamber passed a bill to guarantee the current tax rate for our middle class. If this bill fails to pass, taxes will go up on nearly everyone in this country. But instead of passing the Senate bill, an extension of tax rates that nearly every single member of this body supports, our order of business to attempt to pass a rule on the underlying bill for a second time. Why? So that we can continue to hold the extension of middle-class tax cuts hostage to enable the richest amongst us to get another Bush-era style tax handout. Make no mistake, there is but a single roadblock in the way for the middle class right now, and that's the majority in this House. The other chamber passed a bill. The President said he will sign that bill, and if just one of every 10 Republicans in this body stands with our side of the aisle, we can ensure certainty and confidence for our middle class. Instead, it looks like we're heading down the road of yet another manufactured crisis. From government shutdowns to debt ceiling debacles to highway bill holdups, this body has consistently fallen short over the past year and a half. So let's quit these games on the underlying bill. This is about more than a typo. It's about priorities. It's about values. And right now, we must prioritize middle-class tax cuts and provide the certainty and predictability that our American families so desperately deserve and need. With that, I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from North Carolina.
I'll continue to reserve, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Colorado.
I yield myself so time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't like this underlying bill in its original form. I voted against several components of it on Judiciary Committee, and it's a lost opportunity because there was a real opportunity to do bipartisan regulatory reform. Both parties agree with streamlining government processes, reducing red tape, helping important projects move forward, but that was the path not taken. Unfortunately, this body is moving forward in a different way. Now, with the underlying flaw in the bill, I would imagine it would have very little support from either side of the aisle, namely prohibiting agencies from promulgating regulation until employment reached, or unemployment reached 94%, which is nonsensical. But even this new bill now, this correction to the bill, which corrects a non-existent House Resolution 783, which has been indicated, needs to be changed. And there was an effort to do that, which was inexplicably withdrawn. My party intended, or no one from my party indicated that they planned to object. They simply reserved the right to object and find out what exactly was going on. We have found out what is going on. Apparently, the Republicans need to change the resolution that is referenced in HRES 741. And I hope they do so. At the very least, then, this bill, while bad policy, will not be nonsensical as it is now, referencing a non-existent bill. But consideration of all of this is the equivalent of fiddling while Rome burns. Consideration of this rule and this bill and the change to the bill and the change to the rule that changed the bill is all a major time sink, while the country has real needs, like a middle-class tax cut, like investing in infrastructure, like creating jobs. The only thing preventing tax cuts for 98% of Americans and 97% of small businesses from going into effect now is this House of Representatives. We should not hold these tax cuts hostage to a change to a bill and a change to a rule that changes a bill that doesn't exist. No, a change to a rule to a bill. Well, that's where we are today in the U.S. House of Representatives, Mr. Speaker. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, this country deserves better. I cannot support this wasteful rule or bill. I urge a no vote on the rule and the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're faced here today with trying to correct a couple of very minor errors that have occurred. But my colleague wants us to violate the Constitution by bringing forth a bill from the Senate, which the Constitution clearly says is the responsibility of the House, and legislation related to taxes must begin in the House. So I find it a little unsettling that our colleagues have urged us to take up a bill that they know would violate the Constitution. All we're dealing with here are, again, some very minor clerical errors. Mistakes happen, as silly as embarrassing they are, but adults take responsibility for their mistakes, and that's what we're doing here. At the end of the day, we'll still pass a bill to cut down on a bloated bureaucracy and to allow small businesses to flourish. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move to amend the resolution with the amendment I have placed at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Fox. Page 1, line 5, strike 783 and insert 738.
The gentlelady from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the amendment and the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the amendment and the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, On that I request the yeas
Gentleman
and the nays.
from Colorado.
On that I request the yeas and the
The
nays.
yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the amendment and adoption of the resolution. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House yesterday began debate on a bill that would prevent federal agencies from writing or issuing new regulations costing more than $100 million for 2 years or until the unemployment rate drops to 6% or less. They had finished all general debate yesterday. They had completed all amendment debate yesterday, but a problem remained. There was a typo in the bill itself, and yesterday, late yesterday, the Rules Committee met to fix that typo. It changed employment to unemployment. They had to come back this morning to review the rule again, to look at the rule again. But there was another error in the bill, and it had the wrong numbers. You heard there. They're changing it. The original bill should have been 738, and it should be 783. That's what the preceding debate was all about. This is a procedural vote before adopting those changes to the rule, and still to come, completion of that bill, which includes a dozen or more amendments to be voted on, and final passage. This is a 15-minute vote. This is a 15-minute vote, and the vote on the rule should be a 5-minute vote. Here on C-SPAN, we're waiting to hear from Speaker Boehner. His briefing coming up in just a bit. Also, the Democratic leader, Nancy Pelosi, will be speaking. Earlier today, the House did pass a resolution condemning the shooting last week in Aurora, Colorado. They spent the first 40 minutes or so discussing that and adopting that by voice vote. President Obama also addressed the shooting last night in comments to the National Urban League, their annual meeting in New Orleans. The president spoke on the issue for about 5 minutes.
Our hearts break for the victims of the massacre in Aurora. We pray for those who were lost, and we pray for those who love them. We pray for those who are recovering with courage and with hope. And we also pray for those who succumb to the less publicized acts of violence that plague our communities in so many cities across the country every single day. We can't forget about that. Every day. In fact, every day and a half, the number of young people we lose to violence is about the same as the number of people we lost in that movie theater. For every Columbine or Virginia Tech, there are dozens gunned down on the streets of Chicago and Atlanta, here in New Orleans. For every Tucson or Aurora, there's daily heartbreak over young Americans shot in Milwaukee or Cleveland. Violence plagues the biggest cities, but it also plagues the smallest towns. It claims the lives of Americans of different ages and different races, and it's tied together by the fact that these young people had dreams and had futures that were cut tragically short. And when there's an extraordinarily heartbreaking tragedy like the one we saw, there's always an outcry immediately after for action. And there's talk of new reforms, and there's talk of new legislation. And too often, those efforts are defeated by politics and by lobbying, and eventually by the pull of our collective attention elsewhere. But what I said in the wake of Tucson was we were going to stay on this persistently. So we've been able to take some actions on our own, recognizing that it's not always easy to get things through Congress these days. The background checks conducted on those looking to purchase firearms are now more thorough and more complete. Instead of just throwing more money at the problem of violence, the federal government is now in the trenches with communities and schools and law enforcement and faith-based institutions, with outstanding mayors like Mayor Nutter and Mayor Landrieu, recognizing that we are stronger when we work together. So in cities like New Orleans, we're partnering with local officials to reduce crime using best practices. And in places like Boston and Chicago, we've been able to help connect more young people to summer jobs so that they spend less time on the streets. In cities like Detroit and Salinas, we're helping communities set up youth prevention and intervention programs that steer young people away from a life of gang violence and towards the safety and promise of a classroom. But even though we've taken these actions, they're not enough. Other steps to reduce violence have been met with opposition in Congress. This has been true for some time, particularly when it touches on the issue of guns. And I, like most Americans, believe that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual the right to bear arms. I think we recognize the traditions of gun ownership that passed on from generation to generation, that hunting and shooting are part of a cherished national heritage. But I also believe that a lot of gun owners would agree that AK-47s belong in the hands of soldiers, not in the hands of criminals. That they belong on the battlefield of war, not on the streets of our cities. I believe the majority of gun owners would agree that we should do everything possible to prevent criminals and fugitives from purchasing weapons, that we should check someone's criminal record before they can check out a gun seller, that a mentally unbalanced individual should not be able to get his hands on a gun so easily. These steps shouldn't be controversial. They should be common sense. So I'm going to continue to work with members of both parties and with religious groups and with civic organizations to arrive at a consensus around violence reduction, not just of gun violence, but violence at every level, on every step. Looking at everything we can do to reduce violence and keep our children safe, from improving mental health services for troubled youth to instituting more effective community policing strategies. We should leave no stone unturned and recognize that we have no greater mission as a country than keeping our young people safe.
President Obama from last night, you can find all of that speech in our video library at cspan.org. And Mitt Romney continuing his European trip today in London, meeting with Prime Minister David Cameron and Labor leader Ed Miliband. His week-long trip includes stops in Israel and Poland. The president there speaking about the shooting in Aurora, Colorado last week. The House earlier today passing a resolution condemning the shooting and remembering the victims. Here, a couple of votes taking care of some typographical errors. One in the bill that changes the bill said employment, they meant to say unemployment. They had to fix that in the Rules Committee yesterday. When the rule came back today, it had the wrong number on it. They put 783, not 738. So votes here on the House floor to take care of that, and still to come completion of work on that federal regulations bill, including votes on over a dozen amendments, and also final passage here in the House. As this procedural vote on the regulations bill continues, we're going to take you live to the briefing by Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi.
A middle-income tax cut are the House Republicans. The Republicans want to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to give an extra tax cut to people making over $250,000 a year. And what is the effect of that? It makes the middle-class taxpayer pay more, it increases the deficit, and it increases our borrowing from countries like China. Extending the middle-income tax cut is very important for what it means to individual families, that's for sure. What it means to our economy, that money will be spent injecting demand into the economy, creating jobs, and what it means in terms of certainty for our families, for our businesses, and for our federal budget. It's a matter of fairness. We call upon our Republican colleagues to bring this bill to the floor today. They could do it. We have it today. It could be on the President's desk, signed into law for this weekend. We absolutely must do it, though, before we leave for the August break. Yesterday, to get our work done, Democratic ranking members of every one of our committees sent a letter to Speaker Boehner and the Republican committee chairman with a clear message. We must begin bipartisan negotiations immediately to replace the sequester with a balanced deficit reduction plan. The letter went on to say is we must initiate this process now. It's long overdue. We must initiate it now and complete it by September 30th, the end of the fiscal year, to avoid any uncertainty and the devastating consequences for our economy, small businesses, and the middle class. We can avoid this sequester if we just come together at the table in a balanced and fair way. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Peter Pelosi, a number of Democrats have recommended that there be legislation to restrict guns or to stop the sale of large magazines or assault rifles. Will Democrats introduce legislation to address these concerns?
I support what the President said yesterday. I listened to it, saw it, viewed it a number of times, as I'm sure you probably did in his speech before the Urban League. I thought his comments were very thoughtful, provided leadership. When he said we need to build a national consensus to reduce violence in our country. He said I think that Americans want answers to know how this happened. I'm speaking now for myself. And how he, the murderer, that's what he was, acquired the guns and what mental health issues may be involved. So we need some answers about what happened in Colorado. That's why I'm so pleased with the thoughtful statement that President Obama made. He said, so we've been able to take some actions on our own, recognizing that it's not always easy to get some things through Congress these days. The background checks conducted on those looking to purchase firearms are now more thorough and more complete, and I think that's very important. They're important, as you know, they're important voices on all sides of this issue. We all recognize the importance of the Second Amendment and the need and also the need to reduce violence in our communities. Our thoughts and prayers are, of course, with the families of those who died or were wounded in Aurora, Colorado, and everyone nationwide who has been affected by gun violence. But I think we have to, as the President has suggested, everyone come together. I think a good deal of this will bubble up from communities that have been working on this on one side of the issue or the other.
Madam Leader, on the leaks issue, we've talked a lot in the past few weeks about these leaks. Do you think that there has been some sort of a culture shift in the post-9/11 world, the fact that we are more attuned to intelligence issues, the fact that the technology and the ways that information can be disseminated appropriately or inappropriately in this case, that is what has led to this debate and this preponderance of leaks that everyone is so concerned about now?
Well, first of all, there's no question that there has been a shift in the whole approach to intelligence since 9/11, that people are much more aware, both people in this room who write about it and the American people who consume your news. I don't subscribe, though, to the idea that there's a preponderance of leaks. I don't know that to be the case, and that's why I'm pleased that there are two very respected U.S. attorneys looking into the matter. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
given the vote yesterday, do you expect to lose many, if any, Democrats when the Republicans bring up their bill to raise, to extend all tax cuts? And the second part of the question, Boehner's office is saying they're not going to bring up the Senate-passed bill. Do you expect House Republicans to buckle on this?
Well, you have to ask them about that, as I have said to you before. But we're very confident about the Democrats supporting the President's proposal. It is, again, it's the right thing to do on the basis of fairness, which is an important value in our country. It's the right thing to do, the President's proposal is, when it comes to reducing the deficit. It's the right thing to do when it comes to having an approach to the sequester. The money from $250 to $1 million that the President is suggesting that we stop at $250, that money will be almost enough to avoid the sequestration altogether. So our members, Democratic members, are quite excited about the fact that the Senate passed this bill, and now it's just a procedure, a process on the floor.
On the vote when the House Republicans bring up their version?
Well, when the Republicans bring up their version, it's important to know what it costs the middle class. If you look at any of the charts on the subject, the Republican bill gives an average tax break to a person making over $1 million a year, $160,000 a tax break, additional tax break than they get for their income up to $250. And how does that get paid for? Well, it increases the deficit, so that has to be covered by borrowing from China and places like that. But it also takes a toll on the middle class because they pay more. The middle class pays more. All of us in this room pay more. It's an average, but it could be more, of $1,000 per middle-income tax filer. But an average of $1,000. Middle-income taxpayers pay $1,000 more. People making over $1 million a year make $160,000 more. That is our message. Again, there's a great deal of enthusiasm in our caucus about the fact that this is a way forward. It's the path of fairness, but it's also a path to avoid a good deal of the sequestration and to reduce the uncertainty. It's a good place for us to go to the table as we look for more cuts in investments, but as we try to stimulate growth. Okay, well, I think we have 17 votes on the floor. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you, given the past inability of some bipartisan working groups to come up with a solution that Congress will actually act on, what makes you optimistic, if you are, that Congress is going to be able to achieve this sequestration plan by the end of the fiscal year?
Well, we really have to. I mean, I think the urgency is intensified. We're in this situation because last year the Republicans held hostage the lifting of the debt ceiling. You remember it well. And in order to lift the debt ceiling, over 170 Republicans voted for the Budget Control Act, including Mr. Boehner, who rarely votes as Speaker of the House, and Mr. Cantor. They voted for the Budget Control Act. And now that was to send us to the table of the super committee to consider how we could avoid sequestration. We went with an attitude of balance, as the President had done in his conversations with the Speaker in the summer, which the Speaker walked away from, but hoping that the super committee could. But once the pledge to, what's his name? Grover Norquist became more important to members than the oath of office, then we found ourselves where we are today. But again, the urgency is there. We cannot risk just even having the conversation that would suggest that we're not going to do the responsible budgetary things. And it's a bitter pill to swallow for everyone.
Well, that was live from the Capitol. We had some video issues. We hope to have all of that for you later in our program schedule. We also expect to hear from Speaker Boehner. He'll be having his weekly briefing coming up. The House on a series of couple of votes here taking care of typographical errors both in the rule for the regulations bill and when the rule came out this morning it had the wrong number on it. They will fix those, we expect, and move on to initial amendment votes coming up next.
The nays are 183. The previous question is ordered on the amendment and the resolution. The question is on adoption of the amendment. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The question is on adoption of the resolution as amended. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Goodbye. Pursuant to House Resolution 738 and House Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R.